everybody, this is Maria Clark at Sweet Willow Designs and welcome to my studio. Today's project is a series of buttons. We'll go from pretty basic buttons to some molded buttons, and I'll show you how to put a couple of different types of shanks, and then we'll do a fancy button. So let's get started. Materials are basic. I've got an embossing folder for texture and some molds that I've made, cutters, variety of sizes, blades, needle tool, some wire, and these little button shanks that you can buy, and they allow you to make a shank button out of the molded buttons, and then some various colors of clay. So the very first button is this basic button, and I've got a piece of clay rolled out to the number 3 setting on my pasta machine, and I'm going to cut it in half because I'm actually going to layer this. The first layer will be the texture sheet. And I've got this embossing folder. You know, I love these embossing folders by Darice, and I'm just using my acrylic roller to really get a good emboss on this first sheet of clay. Now, the reason I'm doing this in 2 sheets is because I've noticed if I try to do it all on one sheet, it does not tend to be very even. So I find it's a little bit better if I have this bottom sheet, which is through the pasta machine, so it's perfectly smooth and even, and then I layer my texture sheet on top of it, make sure it's pressed down well and that there aren't any air bubbles, and then I'll go ahead and be able to cut my buttons from that piece. So I'm giving you just a little bit of a close-up here so you can see the texture, and I've got a plastic sheet, just some plastic wrap that you can place over this, and this is going to give you a really nice bezel, kind of a bezeled edge. So you can see that I've just got a variety of types of cutters. Here's a little square one, and little teeny heart one, bigger heart, and this round. And you can see that it's very easy just to make any type that you like. I'm using my marking tool to get the center of these buttons, so I'll have nice placement of the holes, and I'll just mark the center lightly on each one of these. This marking template is available. If you just check the iCard or the description below, you'll find a link, and please go check out. It's a DIY marking template, and I find this very handy for all of my projects. On this very small button, there's no real need to mark it. It's pretty small, so I'm just going to use my needle tool and make those holes pretty good size that I know I can get my needle through. And now I'm going to just lightly mark where the holes will be on the other buttons. Because I put the holes in the little teeny heart before it's cured, but when I do these bigger ones, I actually like to use my drill. So I'm just going to mark where I want the button holes to be. And then I will add some acrylic paint, and I'm going to just add a variety of colors. So I'm just using a brush to get that in and make sure it gets into all the crevices. And this is before I've cured it, so I'll go ahead and cure the paint. But I do need to let this dry really well before I get this into the oven. Otherwise, I could get some bubbling from the moisture in the paint. So let's go ahead and get those all painted. Make sure you go around the rim. And then I'll just make sure that those holes are open on the one that I pre-made the holes in. Make sure those are open well. And then I'm ready to set those aside to go into the oven. These are the molded buttons, and I've made these molds out of just commercial buttons that I've had, or charms, things like that. And I'm using these little shanks, and I'll put a description in the description where I get those. And they come in a variety of sizes and plates, different colors. So I've got this mold here. This is one of my really favorite molds, and some fuchsia clay. And I am going to spritz that with a little bit of water as a mold release, and then I'll go ahead and make sure my clay is really well conditioned and press that into the mold. Now you want to, it's impossible to get the exact amount of clay, but you don't want to have too much clay because we're going to have to cut it away, so you may as well just try to get as close as you can. Now I'll use my blade to just cut away any of that excess clay. And I might have to do a little bit of cleanup there, you can see, because I didn't get that completely off, so I'll just clean that up. Get all those crumbs of clay off of there. And now I've got my molded button. I'm going to go ahead and leave it in the mold and put my little button shank on there. And I'll seat that just a little bit by pressing it lightly in. I'm not going to press it very deeply in. And now I've got a piece of clay rolled out to the number 3 setting and a round cutter, and I was just making sure that it's big enough to cover up that shank. And I'm using a little smaller cutter to make sure that so I can put the hole in there, and then you can see. Now, in retrospect, I might have made this cut a little bit wider. So I'll press that down, and then I will use my texture sheet to finish it up and give it some texture and smooth it out. So I'm just going to go ahead and texture that up. Then I'm using my needle tool to create a little divot or dent there. That allows the needle to go through easily, and just clean up any edges that I might need to. And demold that. You see how easily that popped out? And then I'll just use a little bit of pearlax or pearlescent powder to highlight the texture of that button. And I'm just using a little bit of gold here, and I'll give it a really pretty look. Could use a soft brush if you wanted to put this color on. I just tend to use my fingers. And you'll notice that I'm using the cap. If I dip directly into the pearlax, it's just comes out way too much. I've got a little tin of cornstarch, and I'm just going to drop that in so that it supports that button. Now I'm doing another molded button, but I'm going to show you how to make a shank out of wire. And again, just the same cutters and this clay. Condition it, get your clay into the mold with little spritz of water to release. Same thing, of course. Just get it really pressed in there well, and then use your blade to clean it up. Take off any of the excess clay. Careful with your fingers there. And just do a little bit more cleanup here. All right. Now I'm going to make the shank with this wire. And this is 24 gauge wire. And I have a knitting needle. You could use a bamboo skewer or whatever you've got that's of a small enough size. You don't want it too big. And just wrap it around and get that a little bit tight on there. And now I have the actual shank piece. This excess wire is going to help the shank stay embedded in the clay. So I'll take a pair of my flat nose pliers and just put some bends into this wire on both sides. And once I get that done, I'll just kind of finesse it just a little bit so that I know that it's going to sit well on the button. And I'll just try it out, and I've got way too much wire there, so let me snip off a little bit of that. And that's looking pretty good. All right, now I'll set that on the button and get it centered. And this one, because it's wire, I am going to use a needle tool to just embed it into the clay, just push it in a little bit more than I did the other one, because I really want this to be well embedded. And then I'll do the same technique. Just take a sheet of clay rolled out to the number 3, create the cover and the little donut that I'll put over the shank. And then I will use my texture sheet to spread that clay out. Now I would, again, add a little bit, probably a little bit more clay if I had this to do over again, but you can use as much as you think you need. And I'm just smoothing it down, making sure the wire's covered. And I'll do the same thing with my needle tool to give it a little kind of trough there for the needle to fall through, and clean up my edges. And there you go. And do the same thing, a little pearlax powder, give it a little texture and highlight the ridges there. And then I will drop that into the cornstarch with the other ones. I'm going to do all my baking at the same time. These last buttons are cute little flowers and leaves, and it's really simple to make. One technique that I'll share with you, a little tip, is when you're making buttons or beads, it's really helpful if you use a cutter that is the same size so that you can make sure that your beads are all going to be the same size. So you can see it's rolled out to the number 1 setting, and then I'll either put 2 or 3 or 4 of these little circles together to make my different sizes of beads. But I know that if I always use 2, I'm going to get the same size of bead. So I've got these little beads made, and I'm using a cutter, a little teardrop cutter, to make some leaf shapes. And I'll just cut a bunch of these, and I'm going to randomly place them on the white ball of clay. And just randomly, I'm not paying any attention really to where I'm placing them. Just getting them on there. I'm not even counting, so that they probably don't all have the same number. But I'll go ahead and get my leaves on. And then I've got a little flower cutter. Again, this is rolled out to the number 3 setting, these sheets. And this little flower cutter. And I'll just cut a bunch of these flowers. And I'll place those on the clay, in between the leaves. Again, no rhyme or reason really, except that they're on the white space between the leaves. And get those all placed. And these are going to create some cute, fun little beads that would look really great on a girl's dress. Now I'm going to put a little bit of this purple clay, lighter purple, in the middle of the flowers to give a little center. And you can see these are going to be sort of a mod kind of flower. They're not going to be real precise. They're not like a cane, but they'll make a cute button. So I've got all the pieces of clay on, and now I'm going to roll it in my hands. And I'm going to be careful to keep the round shape. And that way I get the clay sort of smooth around the ball, and I'll take an acrylic or glass tile and just press that down. And there's the button. And then all I have to do is add the 2 holes, the buttonholes. So again, center finding, and then I'll place my holes. And for these, I'm just going to go ahead and place them in the raw clay. And I've got to turn it over and do it on both sides so that that hole is the right size on both sides. Get it on some card, and I will get all of my buttons in the oven for 60 minutes. Be sure you tent it. And here they all are out of the oven. Now these flat buttons, textured buttons, I am using my drill to put the buttonholes in. And you can see it's just a simple process of finding my marks and then using those marks as guides. And just check the back to make sure I've gone all the way through and I have a smooth, clean cut buttonhole on the other side. And those are turning out good. So I'm going to take off a little bit of the excess paint. You don't have to do this. You could leave the paint on there. But I'm going to go ahead and use some sandpaper. And you can kind of see the difference, the sanded against the non-sanded piece. And just decide which you prefer. I prefer them sanded, so I'll go ahead and get the rest of these sanded. And here's what they look like. There's the flat textured buttons and my molded buttons, my molded shank buttons. I hope you enjoyed this project. This is a fun way to make custom buttons for any of your garments. You can really match the colors, you can match the style, and have a really fun, unique button for a purse or a sweater, etc. I want to thank you all for joining. If you enjoyed this project, please consider subscribing, giving me a thumbs up, or leaving me a comment. As always, thanks for joining me in my studio. Take care.